Jake had always dreamed of traveling to the stars. As a child, he would stare up at the night sky, imagining what life might be like on far-off planets. Now, as an adult, he was living that dream sort of. His mission to explore a distant planet had started off well enough, but things had quickly gone wrong. His spaceship, the Arcadia, had encountered a sudden and unexpected storm in space, one that no one had predicted. The result was a crash landing on an alien planet. He had no idea where he was, only that the terrain was unlike anything he had ever seen. The planet's atmosphere was thick, and the air smelled like metal and moss. Jake's heart raced as he stumbled out of the wreckage, disoriented and unsure of what to do next. His body ached from the impact, but he had no time to dwell on it. The ship's comms were down, and he had no way of contacting Earth or anyone who might be able to help. He was stranded. After what felt like hours of aimless walking, Jake stumbled into a dense forest. The trees here were unlike any on Earth, massive, twisting with bioluminescent vines that glowed faintly in the dim light of the planet's twin moons. He tried to focus, taking in his surroundings, but the pain in his head kept him from thinking clearly. His only goal now was survival. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since the crash, and there was nothing left on the ship to scavenge. Jake looked around, hoping to find something edible. He had no idea what the creatures of this planet ate, but his options were limited. He was about to give up when he spotted a small fruit growing on a nearby vine. It looked strange, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He reached for it and took a cautious bite. The fruit was surprisingly sweet, and he felt a momentary surge of relief. Before he could take another bite, he heard something rustling behind him. His heart skipped a beat as he turned around quickly. Standing a few meters away was a figure, tall and slender with shimmering skin that seemed to reflect the light of the moons. The figure was humanoid, but there was no mistaking it. This was no human. The alien woman stood motionless, her large eyes fixed on him. Her face was striking, almost ethereal, with high cheekbones and a sharp jawline. She wore clothing made of a material that shimmered like the stars, but it was the way she moved that captivated Jake the most. It was graceful, almost fluid, as though she was a part of the forest itself. Jake froze, unsure of what to do. His mind raced as he wondered if this alien was hostile. Was she the type of being who would see him as an intruder? Would she attack him? But the alien woman didn't make a move. She simply watched him, her gaze intense, but not threatening. It was as if she was waiting for him to make the first move. Jake took a deep breath and decided to try something. Reached into his pocket and pulled out the last item he had left from the ship, a small chocolate bar. It was a simple treat, but in the face of uncertainty, it felt like the right thing to offer. He didn't know why, but he felt an urge to show kindness, even to someone from an entirely different world. He held out the chocolate to her, offering it silently. Her eyes flicked down to the treat and then back up to Jake. She seemed puzzled, perhaps even curious. After a long moment, she slowly stepped forward and took the chocolate from his hand. The action was delicate, almost careful. Then, without a word, she unwrapped the chocolate and took a small bite. Jake watched in silence as she savored the taste. Her face seemed to soften, and for a moment she looked almost human. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Though it was brief. "I have never tasted anything like this," she said, her voice soft but clear. It was melodic, like a song. "What is it?" "It's chocolate," Jake replied, still a bit unsure of himself. "It's a sweet treat from Earth." She tilted her head, her curiosity growing. "Earth. You are from Earth?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, that's right. My ship crashed here. I don't know how to get back." The alien woman's expression shifted. She stepped closer, her movements smooth like the wind through the trees. There was something about her presence that made Jake feel both anxious and safe, as if she was a mystery he wanted to solve, but also something to be trusted. She studied him closely, her eyes scanning his face as though she could read his thoughts. "I can help you," she said finally, her voice carrying a quiet certainty. "You are not alone here." Jake blinked in surprise. You can help." "Me, yes," she replied. I will protect you forever. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The intensity in her eyes was powerful, like a promise that couldn't be undone. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but something about her words resonated deep within him. He had been so lost and alone since the crash, but now, this strange alien woman was offering him her protection. "Thank you," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say. I didn't expect anyone to... "There's no need for thanks," she interrupted softly. "It is my duty. You gave me something precious, something I had never experienced before." She glanced at the chocolate wrapper in her hand and then back at him. "I will protect you as you have protected me." Jake felt a weight lift from his chest, though. He wasn't sure how this promise would play out. He had no idea what kind of world he had crash-landed on, but for the first time since the crash, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he would survive. The alien woman's promise made him believe that he could make it through this strange world, no matter how dangerous or unknown it might be. He took a tentative step forward, still unsure of how to proceed. But she didn't seem to mind. In fact, she smiled slightly, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly warmth. "Come," she said. "There is much to see. We're not the first human to visit this planet, but you will be the first to be protected. By me." And so, with that strange yet comforting promise, Jake followed the alien woman into the unknown. Uncertain of what lay ahead, but feeling for the first time that he wasn't truly alone. The days that followed Jake's encounter with the alien woman were strange and full of surprises. Lyra, as she had introduced herself, guided him through the alien forest with ease. She seemed to know the planet as well as he knew his own hometown, as if the land itself was her home. There was a calmness about her, a quiet confidence that made Jake feel safe. Even when they ventured deeper into the unknown, the first thing Jake noticed was how the planet seemed alive in a way Earth never had. The trees whispered with the wind, their leaves shimmering in the twilight. The plants, some of which looked like nothing he had ever seen, pulsed with light as though they were breathing. The air was thick and full of strange scents that Jake couldn't identify. Somehow they were comforting, not unpleasant. Lyra moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, as if she was a part of the environment itself. She could leap from one branch to another without a sound, her feet barely touching the ground. Jake, on the other hand, stumbled and struggled to keep up, tripping over vines and loose rocks. Yet despite his clumsy movements, Lyra never once seemed frustrated or annoyed. Instead, she would glance back with a small, patient smile before helping him when he needed it. As they traveled, Lyra shared more about her world and her people. Her planet, she explained, was called Veralia. It was a peaceful place, full of beauty and strange creatures, but it had not always been this way. For centuries, Veralia had been caught in a constant struggle with a hostile species known as the Orcs. The Orcs were ruthless conquerors who saw other species as tools to be used and discarded. They had tried to invade Veralia multiple times, but the people of Veralia had always managed to defend themselves, though at great cost. Jake listened intently, fascinated by Lyra's stories. She spoke with a quiet strength, but Jake could hear the sadness in her voice when she spoke of the wars that had scarred her world. Despite the losses, she was proud of her people's resilience, their ability to fight back, and their commitment to protecting their land. "What happened to the Orcs?" Jake asked, curious about how this ancient conflict had affected her world. "They are still out there," Lyra replied, her eyes hardening for a moment. "They will never stop. They are relentless." Jake could sense the weight of those words. There was a danger to this world that he had not yet fully understood. He had thought his crash landing was the worst thing to happen to him. But now he realized that there were much greater threats lurking in the shadows of this alien world. As they continued their journey, Lyra led Jake to a small clearing where a strange, glowing structure stood. It was a building of sorts, made of smooth, reflective material that seemed to shift in color as they approached. Lyra had told him that it was one of the ancient places of her people, a place where they could communicate with the spirits of the planet and seek guidance. Inside, the air was cool and filled with a soft hum, like a living heartbeat. The walls, were covered in intricate carvings, some of which Jake recognized as symbols. He had seen similar markings in the ship's data logs, though he had never been able to understand them. Lyra seemed to know the markings well, tracing her fingers over them as she spoke in a language Jake could not comprehend. "This is a place of power," she said softly. "It is where the bond between my people and the land is strongest." Jake glanced around, feeling both awed and overwhelmed. It was hard to believe that such a place existed, that he had somehow stumbled into a world so different from his own. He felt like an outsider, an intruder in this beautiful foreign land. Lyra's presence made it easier to bear. Her calm, steady energy had a way of making everything feel right, even when the situation seemed completely wrong. After some time, Lyra led him outside and pointed to the sky. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. "The Xerics come when the moons are full," she explained. "They believe that during these phases, the planet is weak. They try to strike when they think we are vulnerable." Jake nodded, understanding the seriousness of her words. The peaceful world he had thought he'd crash-landed on was far from it. Lyra's people were in constant danger, and yet, despite all the fear and loss, she remained strong. Jake admired her for that. She had chosen to protect him, even though she didn't know who he was or where he came from. "I'm sorry," Jake said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I didn't realize how much danger you're in. I just... I never imagined all of this." Lyra turned to him, her expression soft. "You have nothing to apologize for, Jake. You didn't ask for this. No one does. But you have shown me kindness, and for that, I will protect you no matter what." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Jake's chest tighten. He had expected to be alone on this alien planet, to have to fight for his survival. But Lyra's promise had changed everything. She was no longer just a stranger in a strange land. She was someone who had decided to help him, to protect him, without hesitation. That night, as they sat around a small fire in the clearing, Jake couldn't help but think about how different his life had become in such a short time. One moment, he had been an astronaut, heading out to explore the stars. The next, he was stranded on a distant world, relying on an alien woman to keep him safe. But as the fire flickered and the moon shone overhead, Jake realized that he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Lyra was here, and she had made him a promise that he could hold on to, even when the world around him felt uncertain. "I'm glad I met you, Lyra," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying across the still night air. She turned to him, her eyes gleaming softly in the firelight. "And I am glad I met you, Jake. The stars have brought us together for a reason. Now we will face whatever comes together." And as Jake looked at the woman beside him, he realized that she was right. No matter what dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. He wasn't alone anymore. Jake woke up the next morning to a strange feeling of calm. The alien world he had crashed on had become more familiar with each passing day. Though every moment still felt like an adventure, Lyra had promised to protect him, and so far, she had done just that. Yet Jake could not shake the feeling that their peaceful days were numbered. He had learned that the Xerics, the enemy Lyra had spoken about, were getting closer, and no matter how beautiful this world was, it was also dangerous. After their conversation the previous night, Lyra had shown him more about the land. She led him to a high ridge that overlooked a valley filled with strange creatures. Some of them looked peaceful, grazing under the warm glow of the twin moons. Others were large, predatory creatures with sharp claws and glowing eyes. Lyra didn't seem concerned. She simply kept walking as if she knew exactly what each creature was and what it would do. Jake followed her, trying his best to keep up. The air was cooler now, a sign that the day was coming to an end. As they walked, Jake couldn't help but feel a growing sense of worry. The Xerics had been a constant threat to Lyra's people, and he had the feeling that this peace wouldn't last forever. He needed to find a way to contribute, to help. He couldn't just be the helpless human who needed protection. "Lyra," Jake asked, his voice hesitant, "what will happen if the Xerics come here?" How will your people defend themselves? Lyra paused and turned to him, her face unreadable for a moment. We have defenses, she said softly, but the Xerics are not easily defeated. They have ships they can destroy entire cities with. A single blow. Our people are strong, but we have suffered many losses. Jake frowned, trying to understand the full weight of her words. So, there's a real chance they could win. Lyra looked at him with a calm expression, but Jake could see the pain behind her eyes. They are persistent. But we will not give up. We will fight until the last breath. Jake nodded, but the reality of her words hit him hard. The Xerics weren't just another enemy to face. They were a relentless force that would stop at nothing to conquer this peaceful world. And he had been caught in the middle of it all. As they continued to walk, the sound of an engine reached Jake's ears. He tensed immediately, and Lyra stopped, her body going still as she listened. The hum of the engine grew louder, and soon, a dark shape appeared on the horizon. Jake's heart raced as he realized it was a ship. It was heading straight toward them. That's a Xeric ship, Lyra said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. We need to move quickly. Jake's instincts kicked in. He didn't know what to do, but he followed Lyra as she darted into the trees, her movements swift and practiced. He struggled to keep up, his heart pounding in his chest. As they ran deeper into the forest, Jake's mind raced. What did Lyra plan to do? He had no idea what kind of weapons or defenses she had, but if the Xerics were coming, they needed a plan and fast. Lyra didn't stop, led him to a small hidden alcove, concealed by thick vines and overhanging branches. She gestured for him to stay low, and he did, crouching beside her as the sound of the ship grew louder. Jake's eyes scanned the sky. The ship was large, dark, and menacing. It didn't look like any human technology he had seen before. The surface seemed to shimmer in the light, as if the ship itself was alive. It was nothing like the ships from Earth, sleek and built for exploration. This ship was built for war. They're looking for something, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. And I fear they may have found us. Jake felt a wave of dread wash over him. What should we do? Lyra turned to him, her face set with determination. We wait. We do not engage unless we have to. The minutes felt like hours. Jake tried to steady his breath, his mind racing with fear. His body was tense, every muscle ready to spring into action. But Lyra seemed calm, almost serene in the face of the threat. She wasn't worried, at least. She wasn't showing it. He wished he could be as composed as she was. As the ship hovered overhead, Jake could feel the ground beneath him vibrating. It was as if the ship's presence was pressing down on the very earth, sending a ripple of tension through the air. The shadows of the trees seemed to grow deeper, and the light dimmed as the ship passed overhead, after what felt like an eternity. The ship finally moved away, slowly drifting out of sight. Jake exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been. Holding Lyra stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes. It's gone, she said quietly. For now. Jock let out a sigh of relief. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. There was something about the Xeric ship that made everything else seem insignificant. The technology, the sheer power of it, was unlike anything Jake had ever faced. Do you think they'll come back? Jake asked, still watching the sky for any sign of danger. Lyra nodded, her expression serious. They will. And next time they will not be so easy to avoid. Jake's stomach turned. He had hoped that by being on this planet he would escape the dangers of space travel, but it seemed that danger was everywhere. He wasn't safe. Not here. Not on Earth. What can we do? Jake asked, frustration creeping into his voice. How do we fight back against something like that? Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. You don't have to fight. I will protect you, Jake. And together, we will find a way to protect my people. We will face them, as we always have. Her words gave him some comfort. But deep down, Jake knew that their situation was growing more dangerous by the minute. Lyra had made him a promise, but there were still so many unknowns. How would they stop the Xerics? How would he survive if Lyra was unable to protect him? Lyra seemed to sense his unease. "You are stronger than you know," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "You have already shown great courage, and that is what will see you through." Jake looked at her, meeting her gaze. He wasn't sure if he believed her, but something about her words made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely helpless. They stood in silence for a moment, the air heavy with uncertainty. But Jake knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone anymore. With Lyra by his side, he had a chance. No matter how big the odds were, he would fight. He would survive. And together, they would face whatever came next. Jake and Lyra moved deeper into the heart of the forest after the Zarik ship had passed. The tension from the close encounter still hung in the air, but they didn't stop. Lyra seemed unaffected, her steady pace never faltering.
Jake,
On the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling of danger that clung to him like a second skin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The bioluminescent plants began to glow again, their soft light adding an eerie beauty to the surroundings. Jake had learned that the planet's nights were unlike Earth's. The air was cooler, but there was always a quiet hum of life around them. Strange sounds echoed from the trees, and glowing insects flitted through the air, casting small sparks of light as they moved. For the first time since his crash landing, Jake realized how far he was from home. The thought of Earth felt like a distant memory, like a story he used to tell himself. This alien world, with its dangers and wonders, had become his reality. "How much farther?" Jake asked, trying to keep the fear from creeping into his voice. He didn't want to admit how uneasy he felt, but the thought of more Zariks and their ships was enough to make anyone nervous. Lyra glanced at him and smiled softly. "Not far. We are almost at the safe place I told you about, a place where my people gather for protection." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Protection from what?" "From the Zariks," she said simply. "We have to stay hidden until we are certain the threat has passed." They continued walking, and after a while, the trees began to thin out. The ground became rockier, and the air grew colder. Lyra led him to a large stone formation, surrounded by thick vines and plants. The rocks were covered in ancient carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the light of the twin moons. "This is it," Lyra said, stepping toward the stones. "The sanctuary. A place of safety." Jake looked at the formation with awe. It wasn't like any human structure he had ever seen. It felt ancient, as if it had been here long before humans had ever ventured into space. The carvings on the stones seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain, and he could almost feel the weight of history. Pressing down on him, they entered the sanctuary through a narrow passage between the rocks. Inside, the air was warmer and smelled faintly of flowers and earth. The space was open, with large stone slabs forming a circle at the center. The walls were covered in more carvings, each one telling a story, a history of Lyra's people and their struggle against the Zariks. Jake's eyes widened as he examined the carvings. This ... This is incredible. It's like a record of your people's history." Lyra nodded. "It is. My ancestors built this place as a way to remember and protect their legacy. They believed that as long as the stories were told, the strength of our people would endure." Jake walked around the circle, taking in the beauty of the place. It was peaceful, in stark contrast to the dangers lurking outside. For the first time, he felt a sense of calm. He could see why Lyra felt safe here. After a few minutes, Lyra sat down on one of the stone slabs and patted the ground beside her. Jake hesitated, then sat down next to her. "Tell me, Jake," Lyra said, her voice soft. "What was Earth like? What made you leave?" Jake paused, surprised by the question. He hadn't thought about Earth much since his crash, but hearing her ask brought back memories he had pushed aside. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Earth ... Earth was home," he said slowly. "I don't know if you can understand it, but it was a place where everything was familiar. I grew up there. There were cities, forests, mountains, just like any other planet, I guess. I left to explore, to see the stars, to discover new worlds. But now I'm here, stuck on a strange planet with no way back. Lyra listened quietly, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "Do you miss it?" Jake's heart twisted. "Yes," he said quietly. "I miss my family, my friends, the things that made sense. But I don't know if I'll ever see it again." Lyra's eyes softened. She reached out and placed a hand on his. "You are not alone here. I am with you, and I will help you find a way back. But know this, Jake, sometimes the things we seek are not always the things we need. This world, this place, it has a way of showing us the truths we cannot see from afar." Jake looked at her, unsure of what she meant. But something in her words felt true. This planet, this alien world, had already changed him. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first crash-landed here. He had learned more about strength, survival, and what it meant to rely on others. The moment was interrupted by a sudden sound, something moving quickly through the trees. Jake's body tensed, and Lyra stood up in an instant, her senses sharp. "It's them," she whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness. Before Jake could respond, Lyra motioned for him to follow her. They moved swiftly through the sanctuary, dodging trees and thick vines. The sounds of footsteps grew louder, closer. Jake could hear the rustling of leaves and the crunch of branches beneath heavy feet. "Stay close," Lyra whispered, her voice low and urgent. They reached a hidden nook in the rocks, just as the first of the Zarks emerged into the clearing. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he saw the enemy for the first time. They were tall, armored figures with glowing eyes and sharp, angular features. Their movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. Jake felt his heart race as Lyra pressed her back against the rocks, her body completely still. The Zarks passed by the nook without noticing them. God's eyes stayed locked on them, his mind racing. He had heard about the Zarks, but seeing them in person was different. They were a force to be reckoned with, cruel, calculating, and relentless. Lyra finally relaxed her stance once the Zarks were out of sight. "That was too close," she muttered. "Can't stay here for long. The Zarks are always hunting. We must keep moving." Jake nodded, his heart still pounding. "Where will we go?" Lyra's gaze was steady as she met his eyes. "We will find the others. We need to warn them." Jake knew what was at stake now. The Zarks weren't just a distant threat. They were here, on this world, and they would stop at nothing to conquer it. But with Lyra by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Lyra's warning had proven true. The Zarks weren't just a threat from the sky. They were already here on the planet, hunting. After the close call in the sanctuary, Jake and Lyra moved quickly, weaving through the dense forest, always staying one step ahead of the enemy. They traveled silently, with Lyra leading the way, her every movement fluid and calculated. Jake, though still not as swift or graceful, did his best to keep up. They traveled through the night, taking short rests in hidden alcoves, always vigilant. The sounds of the Zarik patrols echoed through the trees, and Jake couldn't shake the fear that gripped him each time they drew near. But Lyra seemed unbothered. She remained calm, her sharp eyes always scanning their surroundings. Ensuring they weren't spotted, "We need to get to the village," Lyra said one morning, her voice low but steady. "The others are waiting for us." Jake nodded. "What's the plan once we get there?" Lyra paused and looked at him, her expression serious. "We warned them. We can't fight the Zarks alone. We need to unite with my people and prepare for the attack." Jake understood the weight of her words, had seen what the Zarks were capable of, and though he wanted to fight alongside Lyra, he knew they needed more than just the two of them. They needed allies. The path to the village was long, and every step was filled with tension. The forest, which had once seemed so beautiful, now felt like a maze of shadows and uncertainty. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the Zarks were always nearby, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. It wasn't until the third day of their journey that they finally reached the village. Hidden deep within a valley, surrounded by towering cliffs, the village was protected by natural barriers that made it nearly impossible for any invader to find. As they approached the village entrance, Jake noticed the high stone walls and the intricate carvings that adorned the gates. The village seemed peaceful, a stark contrast to the dangers lurking outside. "This is where we will find safety," Lyra said, her voice filled with quiet relief. Led Jake through the gates where he was greeted by the people of her village. The villagers were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. They were taller than humans, with skin that shimmered faintly in the light, much like Lyra's. Their eyes were a deep shade of blue, and their movements were graceful, almost fluid. It was clear that they had adapted to life on this planet, in a way that made them almost one with the land itself. Lyra was welcomed with open arms. The villagers seemed to recognize her immediately, and they greeted her with respect. As she spoke to the village leaders, Jake stood quietly to the side, feeling like an outsider. He was a stranger in this world, a human on a planet that wasn't his own, but Lyra's presence reassured him. She had promised to protect him, and he knew that with her by his side. He wasn't completely alone. After a brief discussion with the leaders, Lyra turned to Jake. "The village is prepared," she said. "But we still need to gather more support. There are other groups of my people scattered throughout the planet, and we must warn them of the impending attack." Jake's heart sank at the thought of moving again, but he knew there was no other choice. The Xerics were closing in, and the longer they waited, the more dangerous the situation became. They couldn't afford to waste time. As they began preparing for their journey to the next village, Jake felt a mix of emotions. He was relieved to be in a place of safety, but he also knew that the battle ahead would be their greatest challenge yet. The Xerics were coming. Lyra's people needed to be ready. The next village they visited was farther north, nestled in a dense forest near the mountains. The people there were just as tall and graceful as those in the first village, but they were more cautious. They had heard rumors of the Xeric ships, but they hadn't yet seen them for themselves. Lyra spoke to the village leaders, explaining the threat and urging them to prepare for battle. Jake watched from a distance as the villagers discussed their plans. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't know if they would survive the coming war. But there was something else there, something that Lyra had shown him time and time again. A quiet determination, a refusal to back down in the face of danger as the sun began to set. Casting long shadows across the village, Lyra returned to Jake's side. "They are ready," she said. "Now we wait." Jake didn't know how long. They would have to wait, but he knew that the tension in the air was building. The Xerics were out there, and they were coming. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. That night, as they sat around a small campfire, Lyra spoke again. "Jake, I have to ask you something," she said softly. Jake looked at her, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "It comes to battle," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "If we can't hold them back, will you fight with us? Will you stand with my people?" Jake's heart raced. I've never imagined himself in a battle like this. He was just a human, a stranger on an alien world. But looking at Lyra, seeing the trust in her eyes, he knew what he had to do. "I'll fight," Jake said without hesitation. "I don't know how much help I'll be, but I'll fight with you. I won't let you face this alone." Lyra's gaze softened, and she gave him a small but grateful smile. "Thank you, Jake. Your courage means more than you know." The next morning, the village prepared for battle. Jake wasn't sure what he expected. He had never been a soldier, and the thought of facing the Xerics in combat filled him with fear. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Lyra face this threat alone. He would fight, even if it meant risking everything. As the villagers gathered their weapons and prepared to defend their home, Jake stood with Lyra, his heart pounding. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. And in that moment, as the villagers stood united against the threat of the Xerics, Jake realized that he had found something he hadn't known. He was looking for a purpose, a place to belong. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something bigger than himself. The day of the battle arrived sooner than Jake expected. The once peaceful village now stood on the edge of a desperate fight for survival. Lyra and the other villagers had worked tirelessly to prepare, reinforcing their defenses and gathering what weapons they could. The air was heavy with anticipation as the villagers assembled near the stone walls. ready to face the oncoming threat. Jake stood at the edge of the camp, trying to steady his nerves. His heart raced as he looked around at the people who had accepted him into their world. He wasn't a soldier, not by any means. He was just a human, a stranded traveler, but Lyra had asked him to fight with them. And despite the fear gnawing at him, he couldn't back down. Lyra approached him, her face serious but calm. "Jake," she said softly, her voice steady. "You've already shown more courage than many of my people, but today you must trust in yourself." Jake nodded, trying to keep his breathing even. "I'll do my best," he said, though he wasn't sure if his words would be enough to calm the storm inside him. Lyra's eyes softened. "That's all any of us can do." They stood together for a moment, watching the villagers prepare for the battle ahead. The sky above them had darkened, and the distant sound of a Xeric ship's engines could be heard in the air. The threat was real, and it was drawing closer. "We need to get into position," Lyra said, breaking the silence. "Stay close to me. I'll protect you, as I promised." Jake followed her lead as they made their way to the front lines of the village where the villagers had gathered. Lyra had told him that their best chance was to hold the line, to prevent the Xerics from advancing any further into the village. If they could stop them here, they might be able to save the rest of the planet from invasion. The village had transformed in a matter of hours. The peaceful, quiet place Jake had come to know was now a battlefield, with makeshift barricades and weaponry scattered across the clearing. There was a quiet determination in the air, a collective resolve that Jake hadn't seen before. As the sound of the Xeric ships grew louder, Jake's hands began to shake. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and turned to see Lyra looking at him, her expression calm but filled with purpose. "They are coming," she said. "Stay focused. We can do this." Jake didn't respond. He couldn't find the words to express the mix of emotions inside him. All he could do was nod and tighten his grip on the weapon they had given him. It wasn't much, just a simple blaster, but it would have to do. The first wave of Xerics arrived just as the sun began to set. Casting an orange glow across the battlefield, the Xeric ships hovered above the village, their engines whirring as they released a barrage of fire. Jake flinched as the blasts hit the earth, sending plumes of dirt and smoke into the air. The villagers responded quickly, firing back with everything they had. The air was filled with the sounds of battle explosions, blaster fire, the cries of the wounded. Jake's heart raced as he found himself in the thick of it. He didn't know what to do at first. He had never been in a fight like this. But Lyra was always there, her presence a constant reassurance. She moved with grace, her blaster firing with precision as she took down enemy after enemy. The Xerics seemed relentless, but Lyra's people were determined. They fought with everything they had, refusing to let their world fall into the hands of the invaders. Jake did his best to keep up. He aimed his blaster, firing at the Xerics as they advanced, trying to hit them with the limited training he had. Received, he missed a few shots, but he kept going, fueled by the fear of losing this place. It's his chance to survive. He could see the villagers fighting valiantly, their faces set in grim determination. They were fighting for their home, for their families, for everything they had worked to protect. Jake couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for them. These weren't soldiers, they were farmers, healers, and artisans who had been forced into a battle they never asked for. And yet they fought as if their very lives depended on it, because they did. Lyra was everywhere. She was like a force of nature, moving through the chaos with purpose, taking down Xerics with deadly accuracy. Jake couldn't keep up with her, but he kept his eyes on her, trusting that she would lead them to victory. Every time he saw her, he felt a sense of strength and courage fill him. It pushed him to keep fighting. The battle raged on for what felt like hours. The Xerics were numerous, but the villagers were holding their own. Jake's hands were shaking with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "We can do this." They had to. Then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Xeric forces pulled back. Jake blinked in disbelief as the remaining enemy ships began to retreat, their engines powering up and pulling away from the battlefield. The villagers stood together, watching in silence as the Xerics retreated into the sky. The sound of the battle faded. leaving only the soft hum of the planet's night. Jake could hardly believe it. They had done it. Against all odds, they had pushed the Zareks back. Lyra stood beside him, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She looked at him, her face tired but filled with something else: pride, determination, relief. "We did it," she said softly. "We fought together, and we won." Jake nodded, his body still trembling from the fight. He didn't know what to say. Words felt so small compared to what they had just done. He had fought alongside Lyra and her people, and together they had defended their home. For the first time since his crash, he felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a stranded human anymore. He was part of something much bigger than himself. As the villagers began to tend to the wounded and assess the damage, Jake and Lyra stood together, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky. The fight was over, but the war was far from won. The Zareks would return, but now Jake knew they weren't facing it alone. Lyra turned to him and smiled. "You fought well, Jake. You proved yourself." Jake didn't know how to respond, but he smiled back, grateful for her words. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just a visitor on this planet anymore. He was part of the fight, part of the team. Together, they would face whatever came next.